Well, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for we'll call it our midweek Hebrew word study. And we are starting with the book of Ruth today. And we're going to maybe go a little deeper than what we have in some of the previous studies, expose you to a little bit more of the Hebrew. The book of Ruth is one that has the easiest Hebrew in it. So if you're ever so moved to start reading some Hebrew, the book of Ruth would be the place to start. What I'm going to be using is a lot of the commentary from what's called the interlinear, put out by a group called Art Scroll, and they have different people who have donated quite a bit of money to come up with different types of editions, and this is called the Schottenstein edition and interlinear. And interlinear means that it has the Hebrew on top and the English below, and it has quite a bit of commentary to it. And of course, the book of Ruth is only 4 chapters, so it's not very long. But if you are interested, the Art Scroll website has some kind of overwhelming. There's a lot of information, a lot of books that they provide. It's mainly a Jewish website for more of Orthodox Judaism, but it is kind of fun to look around. And so just wanted to show you that's where I'm going. And the interlinear is what you're seeing here on your screen, where you have the Hebrew characters and you have English underneath, the parts of speech down below, and then the Strong's concordance number up on top. Um, the groundwork for the book of Ruth, it comes, as it says here in the first verse, it says, "And it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled." So this book of Ruth occurs during the time of the judges. And as you know, we just finished the book of Judges, so this is just a very timely insertion here of the book of Ruth. The time of the judges lasted 350 years, which is pretty incredible. You think, we read through these 25 chapters or 21 chapters, excuse me, of Judges, and it covered a span of time that's longer than the United States has been a country. Um, and so that's just mind-boggling to think of all the time that took place. And obviously, so much more had occurred during those 350 years than what's recorded in the book of Judges. Also, the book of Ruth is read by um, Jewish synagogues, in the Jewish synagogues at the time of what is their festival of Shavuot. In Christendom, it is the festival of Pentecost, which occurs 50 days after um, Passover or the resurrection um, of Jesus. And so it is a springtime festival, festival Shavuot. It's the festival of first fruits, of bringing their first harvests in and giving them to God. And there's so much symbolism that is involved between the first fruits of bringing to God and the Feast of Pentecost and how it relates to Christianity. And we'll see some of that brought out as we go through this as to why the Jews decide and choose to read the book of Ruth during the time of Shavuot. So one thing that we have to remember as we're going through this, that the judges were a different type of class of people. You could kind of think that they're kind of like our pastors are today. In Judaism, they don't have pastors. They will have a rabbi who's more inclined to be thought of as a teacher rather than what we think of pastors to be in Christendom, of teaching, of preaching, of providing counsel. They're pretty much the go-to person. They manage everything in the church. Uh, Rabbis are not that way in Jewish synagogues. They're run completely differently. The rabbis are mainly dedicated to teaching and instruction. And so here were these judges, and they were supposed to be a guide to the people. They were supposed to be in a position to provide direction, to know the laws, which were God's laws. They were required to know that, and they were supposed to provide the direction because God was supposed to be the king. And we see that as we look at the close of um, chapter 21 of Judges, where we finished off last week with this kind of interesting sentence, which we had seen throughout the book of Judges at least three times. It says, "In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes." And of course, we think of the king of being Saul and David and so forth, but it also gives the indication that God was not king. Not that he didn't want to be, but he wasn't allowed to be. The people would not allow God to be king, and everybody did what was right in his own eyes. God had given them the direction on what to do, and they chose to ignore it and do their own thing. So we get into the book of Ruth with this understanding of what it was like during the time of Judges. Um, and of course, we mentioned that the period of the Judges was 350 years. The book of Ruth is thought to have the story occurred about 973 BC, or sometimes some people say BCE, before the Common Era, or before Christ. Either way, it's the same date. So basically, 1,000 years before um, the birth of Jesus is when the book of Ruth was written and the story was written. So when we begin to look at this, we're only going to do verse 1 today because there's just so much packed into it. And I'll give you a little bit of flavor for the Hebrew. Um, Notice where my cursor is here. The Hebrew would go Vayehi b'nei shafot hashofetim, and that takes us right to here. So these four words, and it says, and it translated, and it came to pass in the days when ruled the judges. So here is where the English has to embellish. You know, you see, there's only four groups of letters here, characters. And of course, in the English, you get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 words in English that are required to adequately translate four groups of letters in the Hebrew. And of course, that's the art of translation. Um, and so they had to add some understanding to make it flow. And what you will notice here, this word Vayahi that I'm circling with my cursor, you'll see that the same word occurs a little bit further on, about three-quarters of the way down the sentence, and it's the same Vayahi. But you'll see the translation of it is very different. Here it starts out, and it came to pass, and then the second portion here says that there was. Well, it kind of means the same thing, but in Hebrew, that when you see via he at the beginning of a sentence, it is pretty much like in children's storybooks where it says once upon a time. And so when you hear that even today in English, you hear once upon a time, you know a story is coming. You know that there's going to be some fable, some story that comes after this once upon a time. Well, this is the Hebrew equivalent of once upon a time, but it's not a good story. It always means that there is some tragedy coming, some sorrowful event that's about to be described. And so the Hebrew scholars take this and they say, of course, this is kind of strange. And it came to pass when the judges ruled. Well, again, English, in order to make it sound more acceptable to our ears, had to change it, but it's really the word and it came to pass in the days, um, and it has the word shafot, which is word means judged, and then ha shofatim. So when judged the judges, which of course, if you had that in English, a direct translation is, it came to pass in the day judged the judges. Nobody would know what you're meaning. But this is sort of on purpose. This is what Hebrew is. It creates a ability to look at it and say, well, what's going on here? What does it mean? Um, the days judges judged, or the judges, And so the intention is to pique your interest and to look into this. And of course, it's done very well here by the Hebrew sages, so they're not clear in the meaning. It has two meanings. It could be one, that God judged the judges, which he obviously did. If you remember the book of Judges, God was involved. He sent them to lift up the Israelites, to deliver the Israelites, to help them. But we also know that the judges themselves had some problems. And so the other meaning for this is that there was a generation that judged the judges, meaning that the people looked at these judges and saw that they were not all that they were intended to be, that there was corruption, that there were weaknesses, there were failures, there were misrulings and things in the land. So the people were actually judging the judges. So it has a dual meaning. And we find that in Hebrew quite often that there are supposed to be different layers of meaning. There is the simple meaning of you just read it and you take it at face value, or a deeper meaning that you look at, well, what could this mean spiritually, or what could this mean to me personally? What can it mean to a society? So many very different levels of meaning, and we find that very clear here in these words. And the Jewish sages would say that woe unto a generation whose judges are judged. Remember, judges are supposed to be the ones that create stability in this society. They're the ones that are supposed to give you a sense that everything is going the way it should, that justice prevails, that people who are good are rewarded, people who are bad are punished, evils are done away with, injustices are made right. And when you don't have that, you start to lose confidence in your judicial system, you lose confidence in your government. And, as I'm saying this, we're all very much aware of what's going on in our society here with the news and the politics and the judicial system and judges that are condoning one thing and seem to they're supposed to be nonpartisan. They're not supposed to be aligned with any political association, but yet, we feel that we see that happening, that some align depending upon who supports them or who appointed them. You see them ruling in certain ways. And what does it do for us? It creates somewhat of a disgust, somewhat of a distrust. One judge can say this is what should be, and another judge from somewhere that we don't even know where they came from, but supposedly has more authority, can overrule that judge and say, no, this is what it means. And what their voices do is create a law that makes it either illegal or not illegal to do something. And so, we think we're in a time that's unique here in the United States. Actually, it's 3,000 years old, that 3,000 years ago, these judges were doing some very similar things and creating uncertainty, creating distrust, creating times when people just didn't know what was truth and what was error anymore. And the judges were being criticized by the people, and they were being judged by God Himself. So this is what we walk into. What we notice here too is this via he is repeated twice, via he for the judges and then via he for a famine. And in English, you don't see it because the translators change it to, and it came to pass, and that there was. But in Hebrew, it stands right out that these two words are the same. So this would cause the attention of the scholar saying, well, why is this same word being used? And is there a meaning for it? And of course, they assign that yes, there is a meaning. And so their meaning here is that there were two famines in the land. There was a famine, of course, for bread, which is what we normally associate famine being, no food. But they're saying because it was mentioned twice and mentioned before the judges and another one before the famine, that there was also a famine for God's word. And we find that there are many implications in other passages of scriptures where it has a dual association that food, the bread, is very commonly paralleled with God's Word, and God's Word is called the bread of life. And so when you see famines mentioned in the Bible, there's usually a way to look at a spiritual or a religious application of there being not just a famine of food, but also a famine for God's word. And of course, we know that here as the judges are not executing God's word fairly and appropriately. Um, it seems that the whole priesthood system is not working well, and people are not being fed God's word. And of course, the Jewish sages say that when there is a famine for God's word, that God will many times bring about a natural famine for food as a means of getting his point across, as a kind of a wake-up call for what is going on, to wake them up. So much packed into this first part of the verse here. Then we go to the second part of it here. So it's Vayehi Ra'av, a famine, Ba'aretz, in the land. And so there's a stop here. And the next portion of this is a very unique couple words. It's Vayelech, it means and went, and then it says ish. Now the word ish is just man. Of course, English, it doesn't sound very good to say and went man, so they have to put in and went a certain man. Now, again, English, you don't see this, but in Hebrew, there are only two places in the entire Bible where these two words occur in this uh, system, linked together. So Vayelech, ish only occur twice in the entire Bible. Once is here, where they're talking about this man who's going to be leaving Bethlehem, and another time, and it has to do with the father of Moses, and that this is applied to the father of Moses, and it's applied to this man here. And you'll see as we go through the book of Ruth that the book of Ruth has many messianic uh, undertones and shadows. And so what we start to see here is a parallel. Well, what's the parallel between Moses' father and this man in the book of Ruth? Well, Moses' father obviously was a man that created a redeemer, from his lineage. His son was Moses, who redeemed and delivered Israel. And we're going to find here that the father here uh, was in the lineage of the Redeemer of David, which through him comes the Messiah, comes Jesus. So you'll see the parallel here between Moses and Jesus, just way back, even in this phraseology of this certain man, and making reference to him. So again, very, very cool to see this. As we go through this. Also, what you're going to see here that this man came from Bethlehem. The word Bethlehem in Hebrew is really two words. Circling it here, it's called Beit, which is the word for house, and Lechem, which is the word for bread. So again, the irony of it that there's a famine, and this man is from a place that's called the house of bread, and there's no bread in the house of bread. And so he's going to be leaving the house of bread to go look for bread. Again, the irony of it here that is quite interesting. So when he left, he came to dwell in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his two sons. Now, you notice there are no names mentioned here. They mention a man, they mention Bethlehem, they mention Judah. The word Judah means praise. And so, again, a lot of symbolism here of what's going on and where he came from. He was thought to be a very important man. He was thought to be one of the judges that judged in that land. And so, well, what's he doing? Why is he leaving? Is he the only one that left, or did lots of people leave? We really don't know. And where is he going? He's going to Moab. This is actually a forbidden thing. The Moabites in the land of Moab was really, really um, spoken against by Moses and the children of Israel because the Moabites treated um, the Israelites so badly before that they were just the worst of the worst. It was the worst place you could ever hope to go. And so this travel to Moab here, if you look at the map, there's the Dead Sea in the middle. Here's Bethlehem. They have to go up to the north and cross over the Jordan River and then come down about halfway, and there is Moab. It's kind of like, where we are in Sheboygan and having Lake Michigan, and on the other side is you know, Grand Haven or taking the ferry across, but there is no ferry, so they have to walk all the way across. It would take about 7 to 10 days for them to make this journey. And again, quite a undertaking and quite a uh, the need to do that had to be so strong. And why they felt they had to go there, we're going to soon find out. We're going to find out who is this guy, what's his wife's name, and who are his kids. And it doesn't say that he took anything along, even though he was thought to be a very rich man. What's that all about? Who was this guy? So that's enough for today. Hopefully that'll pique your interest, and look forward to having you join us again next week. All right. God bless you all. Bye bye.